We're starting. Now we're going to start with
hiccups.
the poem.
Excuse me. Bart had them for what was it, 11 days?
10 days, yeah. That was bad news.
That was terrible. Neither one of us could sleep.
Yeah. So here we have, in a culture predicated on the perpetual pursuit of happiness, as if it were a fugitive on the loose, it can be hard to discern what having happiness actually feels like, or how it actually lives in us. So Willa Cather came consummately close in her definition of happiness as the feeling of being dissolved into something complete and great, a definition consonant with Iris Murdoch's lovely notion of unselfing.
There you go.
And yet, happiness is as much a matter of how we inhabit the self, how we make ourselves at home in our own singular lives and the dwelling places of our own experience. This is what May Sarton, who's written so movingly about unhappiness and its cure, explores in her poem, The Work of Happiness. So let's listen to, this is going to be read by Maria Popova.
The Work of Happiness.
Can you hear this, Bruce?
Yep.
I thought of happiness, how it is woven out of the silence in the empty house each day, and how it is not sudden, and it is not given, but it is creation itself, like the growth of a tree. No one has seen it happen, but inside the bark, another circle is growing in the expanding ring. No one has heard the root go deeper in the dark, but the tree is lifted by this inward work, and its plumes shine, and its leaves are glittering. So happiness is woven out of the peace of hours, and strikes its roots deep in the house alone. The old chest in the corner, cool waxed floors, white curtains softly and continually blown as the free air moves quietly about the room. A shelf of books, a table, and the whitewashed wall. These are the dear, familiar gods of home, and here the work of faith can best be done. The growing tree is green and musical. For what is happiness but growth and peace? The timeless sense of time when furniture stood a lifespan in a single place. And as the air moves, so the old dreams stir the shining leaves of present happiness. No one has heard thought or listened to a mind, but where people have lived in inwardness, the air is charged with blessing and does bless. Windows look out on mountains, and the walls are kind.
So she then says, complement this with Bertrand Russell on his Secret of Happiness and Kurt Vonnegut's The One Word That It All Comes Down To, and then go back and read another poem by Sarton. There's two poems here, so I just thought these were a nice way to go start. So let's see, let's get out of
I like the way she presents these as Epicurean tips. Like, well, you should have this pate with this sherry, and this will go with that, and then go back over here, and then have this for dessert. You know, it's
right.
a connoisseur.
So tonight we're going to spend time on Transcendentalism, and I came across this little book that I thought was interesting. Hold on a second. There we go. The Supreme Awakening. So the argument here is that many people achieve some notion of loss of self, of they transcend reality, and it happens many times, many different places over the millennia. So he put together this little book to try and capture that. And he starts with this thought that throughout history, great men and women have described exalted experiences of extraordinary wakefulness, freedom, and bliss as different from our ordinary waking experience, as waking is from dreaming. Lao Tzu, Plato, Rumi, Saint Teresa of Avila, Emerson, Emily Dickinson, Black Elk, Einstein, people of all times and places have described experiences that rank among the most inspiring in all of literature. These experiences can be explained in terms of a new expanded framework of human development, the model of higher states of consciousness developed by Maharishi Mahesh Yogi, the renowned Vedic sage in science of consciousness. Anyone can systematically cultivate these experiences through transcendental meditation, simply, naturally, and effortlessly. So he begins here with the English poet William Wordsworth. Wordsworth liked to go hiking. But what he discovered was he'd go off hiking and nature was just so incredibly beautiful, and he would stop and start to meditate, and all of a sudden an incredible change took place over how he viewed everything. And he did this again and again and again. And so he tried to capture that. Here's a poem that he wrote where he was trying to capture this. He's hiking in Wales here. That blessed mood in which the burthen of the mystery, in which the heavy and the weary weight of all this unintelligible world is lightened, that serene and blessed mood in which the affections gently lead us on until the breath of this corporal frame, and so forth. It goes on and on. So he's just using this to start things off as a concrete example. Wordsworth, told people about this, and many of his poems were composed while he was in this higher state. The thing that's remarkable about this is he's very exact. So he settles into a state of increasing tranquility, the weary weight of the unintelligible world. I think that's what it is. Yep. Grows lighter and eventually fades away. And describing the unique condition of his body, he tells us he feels deeply rested. His breath and even his blood flow seem almost suspended. Feels as if he had laid asleep in body. But is he asleep? On the contrary, he seems more awake than ever. Feels he has become a living soul, as though in his prior state he'd not been fully alive. From this deep level, he's able to see into the life of things. So just to put this in historical perspective, you had the Middle Ages, which worked into the Renaissance, where things started to get really much more active. And the Renaissance led into these other epochs. So we have a Baroque period, which led into a classical period. Wordsworth is at the start of the Romantic period, which is a revolt against the classical. The classical is swung very far toward materialism and away from spirituality, and he's trying to capture that in his poems, as are many of the Romantics. So what he's talking about here is there's an inner expansion, there's some clarity, and there's wakefulness. That's one aspect of all this. Everything is just incredibly clear and more vivid. There's happiness and bliss overlaying all this. And then there's the experience, the underlying reality, the texture of it is much deeper, and you're sensing it. It's not what you thought it was. And this leads into the experience of the divine, a feeling of naturalness and familiarity. And it's really a moment. Wordsworth, for example, just had moments when these things happened. They weren't continuous for him. He didn't continually live there, but he treasured them. So here's some names of some others who probably experienced this true reality. So we have Zoroaster in the 10th century BC, a Persian mystic. We have various Chinese, Lao Tzu in the 5th century, Plato probably in the 4th century BC, undoubtedly Jesus of Nazareth, and then just skipping forward, Hildegard of Bingen in the 11th century, Dante in the 13th century, skipping ahead, Henry David Thoreau in the 19th century, Ralph Waldo Emerson, Walt Whitman, Emily Dickinson. These are all the people we'll be dealing with tonight, the Transcendentalists. We had Tennyson as a British writer. We had probably Clare Boothe Luce, who was the wife of Henry Luce, that put together Life and Time magazine. Eugene Ionesco, who was a Romanian French playwright, the Czech poet, and he actually was prime minister of Czechoslovakia, Václav Havel. And we just put in Arthur Koestler here, who is a futurist. So there's just, in all ages, we just find people coming across this that are doing this. So he is now drawing on Maharishi Mahesh Yogi.
You didn't mention the Buddha.
I didn't mention the Buddha. I did not mention the Buddha. The Buddha is clearly in there.
And we both looked at the list.
Right. The states of consciousness, from lowest level to highest level, we start off with very deep sleep, then you start dreaming, then you're waking, you're in between sleeping and being fully awake. Then there's this transcendental consciousness, and then these higher levels of consciousness, which he claims are there: cosmic, God, and then unity, the unity of the universe all around us. Any comments on this, Bruce?
Well, I'm familiar with the sense of union, but I mean, when you have the experience of, a 5-year-old builder, basically the self disappears. One of the qualities that is most noticeable is an incredible clarity, and that's continuous. Like, it isn't off and on. It's there all the time, and with the clarity comes absolute trust of your own mind, and also certainty. Your mind knows that it knows, and then with that comes, you have these, I like to call them like levels of awareness, where you can see a level where you have realization of what's actually really there. Like Like for instance, the love and compassion is vast. It's as big as the universe itself, and you can tell that because that's the quality that comes with it. So these qualities of consciousness are part of what the Buddhists call natural mind, and it simply means transcending the self. Actually, you don't transcend the self; it just simply disappears. That's my experience of it. And so these wonderful blissful states, clarity and so on, just arise naturally.
Mhm.
That's kind of what it's like.
Right. Oh, well said.
Great place to be.
Yeah. Oops, here comes Patty.
Ah,
My apologies. I will catch the first part of the class on the recording.
Okay.
well, yeah.
Just had a nice introduction, but it's nice to have you back, Patty.
I'm really looking forward to hearing about this topic.
Well, it's worth
Yeah,
repeating
so
some
this
of it.
is
Oh, I
Yeah.
don't want to make you repeat everything, honestly.
Well, in order for us to carry on, you kind of have to get some of it. We're talking about what the nature of consciousness.
Okay.
Like, what's it mean to have happiness and clarity? It's
Well, if you want to give me the cliff notes, but I don't want to make everyone else who will be watching this sit through a complete explanation.
no, you'll see that we did a poem and then we went through a little exercise where the people we're talking about tonight, the Transcendentalists, are just part of what people over the millennia have they've attained through meditation, through prayer. They've attained the nature of true reality, the loss of self, and so forth. So that's what you'll see in the in where we started, and we're just about to go start now on the actual Transcendentalists. So the thing to keep in mind here is the people we're talking about here are in the United States all through the 1800s. Emily Dickinson, I think, died in 1886, and Walt Whitman died in 1892. So that kind of frames where they're at. That you have to keep that in mind. But they all were very much caught up with nature and with the mysticism of the world around them. Emerson was probably their spokesperson. He was the most articulate. It turns out that Emerson, when he was 17, had already been reading the Bhagavad Gita, and then he became a Unitarian minister, and he dropped out after a while, as we'll see, because he felt there was much more to it than that. But he had a huge influence on a lot of these other people. So let's go through and see what's going on with Emerson. So there's a bunch of YouTube videos you can find on Emerson. He was born in 1803. So when he was 17, that would be 1820. He'd And while he graduated from Harvard in 1821. Remember, Harvard is really training people to become ministers.
Right.
That's the purpose of Harvard. And so he worked his way up and became the sole pastor of a church in the area in 1830. But then his wife died, and he just ended up resigning from being the sole pastor, and he went off from Boston to Europe, and he went traveling through Italy and France and England. He visited Coleridge and Wordsworth. He went to Scotland, where he met Carlyle, and so forth. Then he came back to the United States, and he moved to Concord, where he spent the rest of his life. And so many of these people would come to see him. Thoreau was there with Walden Pond, which is right there in Concord. He remarried, and then he became a lecturer, and he formed what eventually became the Transcendental Club. So these were people there in the area that bought into what he was talking about, and he published his book, Nature. And then we touched on, not last time, but the time before that, he gave an address at Harvard, where he wanted to have much more American literary independence, not so much dependent upon Europe, Western Europe. And here's what this one analyst, Robert Gross, has to say. Emerson was really at the center of all of this ferment.
Don't you mean foment?
Yeah, foment. In fact, the thing to keep in mind here is this: remember, people from England in particular came to the United States in the 1600s to achieve religious freedom, to get away from what was going on in Europe. And then the Pilgrims, I think, set sail from the Netherlands. So what happened here was that they created every town throughout New England ended up having a church. That was one of the first things that they built. And it was typically a congregational church. And that became, so they went from religious freedom to religious conformity.
Right.
Everybody had a congregational church. And then there was what's called the Second Awakening. So in 1810, 1820, 1830, there was this huge revival of the interest in religion. And there were ministers at these different churches that would have their sermons published, and they would be posted in coffee houses and public houses, and people would read these things and debate these ideas. And this was a key part of life. And if you got invited to go to another church to preach, that was a feather in your cap, and so forth. So it's a very, you have to keep in mind, this is where Emerson is, all of these people, there's a huge interest in what would be called transcendental ideas, as shown by this upsurge in religion. So a lot of the congregational churches split. They ended up setting up a Unitarian church next to the congregational church in a lot of these towns. If you run through Massachusetts, it becomes pretty obvious.
Mm-hmm.
And the thing that goes with it is the Harvard Divinity School was really the Unitarian Divinity School. The people that came out of that ended up becoming Unitarian ministers. Emerson's an example of that. So what he wrote here in this Age is retrospective. It builds the sepulchres of the fathers, the foregoing generations beheld God and nature face to face, and we through their eyes. So why should we not enjoy an original relation to the universe? So you should directly try and link up with the universe. This is what we touched on with Wordsworth in England, but it's true of all of these people. This is why Thoreau went back to nature. He lived at Walden Pond in this hut for a year or so, just trying to link up with what's really basic. So if Emerson was the only person to make this argument, it really wouldn't have mattered. But he gathered others, and he was very influential. So he was the bell cow that everyone followed. We had Bronson Alcott, who was the father of Louisa May Alcott. We had Margaret Fuller, who was turned into an American feminist. We had Walt Whitman, who'd read Emerson's essay, The Poet, as a mission statement for his own poetic project, which we'll come to. And then, of course, we have Henry David Thoreau, who took to heart Emerson's call to cherish your soul, expel companions, set your habits to a life of solitude. So Thoreau was, just in constant meditation or prayer. So although he was born and bred in Boston, Emerson really was in Concord and ended up staying there, I believe, for the rest of his life. He could think and write. Concord is like the 20 miles out from Boston, so it's kind of, if you will, the second wave of towns. You had Boston, and then you had kind of a wave of towns, like Newton,
Right.
But you go another 20 miles out, the Concord is in the second wave of towns. So here he could think and write. He planted pear trees. He could walk to Walden Pond. He had his tall white house on Route 2, which is the Cambridge Turnpike. And he had a lot of acolytes and disciples and screwballs who were called Waldo's menagerie, describing an afternoon during the peak of Transcendentalism when she looked in the parlor and saw him sitting in that circle. And it gave me a feeling of horror, all these men with long beard and bare feet. So some things never change. But there was also discord in Concord. So the village had gradually fallen away from the ideals of the Puritans. And by 1820, business was growing, and congregants were searching for personal religion. So the town adhered to this sort of individualism that was addressed in Emerson's most famous essay, Self-Reliance. The transcendental philosophy, while it considered with quizzical bemusement by the majority of town, nevertheless articulated a form of self-development nearly every citizen would have embraced. So it was able to reach these people that were busy, building up these businesses and families and on and on. There's a bunch of things that we referenced here. This is just a quotation out of Emerson's notebooks and so forth. In April 1st of 1838, it was a cool or cold, windy, clear day, and the Divinity School youths wished to talk with me concerning theism. So I went rather heavy-hearted, but I always find that my views chill or shock people at the first opening. But the conversation went well, and I came away cheered. I told them the preacher should be a poet smit with love of the harmonies of moral nature, and yet look at the Unitarian Association and see if its aspect is really poetic. And they all smiled and said no. A minister nowadays is plainest prose, the prose of prose. He's a warming pan, a night chair at sick beds and rheumatic souls. The fire of the minstrel's eyes and the vivacity of his word are exchanged for intense grumbling enunciation of the sort that you find in Cambridge, Massachusetts, and for scriptural phraseology. I'm going to send out with this the Divinity School address that Emerson gave to the graduating class, but he ended up, this is July 15th of 1838. This is, the chapel was very much crowded. It's a small chapel, if you've ever been there. It's not really, and the graduating class was 15. So it isn't like there, and there was only a few faculty there. So it was really other people that came by to hear Emerson talk. So after he gave this talk, where he basically said, you know, that you should give up on being Unitarian ministers and strike out on your own, which you could imagine how this went over with the faculty. The students were undecided about what action to take. So they finally signed a letter and asked for his manuscript, and they decided merely to go print up. Some of the class did not assent to Emerson's views, but they still thanked him. And then they decided to print, not publish, 300 copies of his Divinity School Address, which you'll look at. Somehow I got it, the slide in here. So you can, in going through his Divinity School Address, what you'll see here is he's drawing upon the physical reality of the present moment in the opening at the start, and how important that is. So the lushness of nature in high summer. This is July 15th, and he acknowledges the perfect loveliness of the physical world. Man under the summer stars is like a young child. The world is his toy. But he quickly turns away from this and takes up universal laws which dwarf the significance of nature's beauty and prompt questions about the world and its order. And he reiterates the ideas developed at length in his book, Nature, laying the groundwork for what he'll say about the state of religion at the current time. A beauty more secret, sweet, and overpowering than that of nature is apparent when man opens himself to the sentiment of virtue. Man then sees the divine and universal that encompass his existence and knows that his place, in the larger picture assures him a limitless capacity for goodness. When man strives to apprehend the absolutes of right, truth, and virtue, he's in harmony with God's creation of the universe for that very purpose, and this is pleasing to God. The sentiment of virtue is identified as reverence and delight in the presence of certain divine laws, which are revealed through experience of the world and through life. The universal laws cannot be fully envisioned or articulated, but are evident in our character and actions. The sentiment of virtue is at the heart of religion. So, you know, you could see how this is not going to fly. He holds up intuition as the means of perceiving the laws of the soul, which are timeless and absolute. They're not subject to current values and circumstances. Goodness and evil are instantly rewarded or punished in the enlargement or diminishment of the man who practices them. External reward and punishment are beside the point. So man is God to the degree that he's inwardly virtuous in subordinating himself to the expression of the divine virtue that speaks through him. He knows himself and realizes his capabilities. As he does so, he acts in accordance with the workings of the universe, and his efforts to understand and exercise virtue are reinforced. The human soul, in its ability to elevate itself, has the power to determine whether we'll go to heaven and hell. That is, there's nothing predetermined but the ultimate fate of the soul. All of this is true because of the unity of man and nature in the divine mind. But because the divine is intrinsically perfect, goodness is real, while evil, the absence of goodness, is not an absolute quality in and of itself. Goodness is identified with life, evil with death. Estranged from goodness, a man progressively loses his connection with the divine and is diminished, and from the universal point of view, if not physically, ceases to exist. So this religious sentiment brings joy and makes sense of the world for us, empowers us, and deifies us. Through the religious sentiment, a man understands that goodness is within him, that he and every other man enjoy a direct relationship with God through intuitive reason, and that virtue cannot be attained by emulating other men. All of society's forms of worship, Oriental as well as Western, were founded on an original direct understanding of God by man. The importance of intuition to the individual is in achieving the religious sentiment, stating that it cannot be received at second hand, stresses that the process takes place through inspiration or revelation rather than learning. If religion is not based on this intuitive individual connection with the divine, the church is meaningless. Man's importance is reduced, and the inner drive to achieve the true religious sentiment is perverted into rejection of a direct relationship with God. So miracles, prophecy, poetry, the ideal life, the holy men, then are present through religion only historically in its ancient intuitive origin, but not as it currently exists. Emerson points to the established Christian church as an illustration of this decline of religion from what it should be. So you can see how many friends he's making here. Jesus belonged to the true race of prophets. He saw and lived the inherent relationship between God and man, perceived the human soul as the outlet of the universal soul, and consequently accorded man his proper greatness. In his life, he demonstrated the agency of God through men. But the example of Jesus has been misused by the church, which quickly came to deny his humanity and to focus upon the idioms of his language and the figures of his rhetoric instead. The church has offered false miracles in the place of miracles of human life that Jesus himself recognized. It's replaced inner perception of truth and goodness with externally imposed commandments. So rather than promoting the doctrine of the soul, as it applies to all, Christianity raises Jesus up above other men. The soul knows no persons, but indiscriminately invites each man to expand to the full circle of the universe. Jesus has been made into a kind of Eastern monarch, his name associated with official, formal titles that obscure his original position as friend of man. If we accept this view of Jesus and subordinate our own importance to his, we do not recognize our ability to also to enter into the divine. The approach that God takes God out of man weakens man. That which reveals God within strengthens man. If God is not within, there's no reason for man's existence. He will decease forever. Jesus and the prophets, the divine bards, only serve to remind us that on our intuitions of the divine, that they do not emanate from us, but from God. Ordinary men tend to exaggerate the importance of a great and rich soul like Jesus, and not to see that they themselves can elevate by coming again to themselves or to God in themselves. The current vulgar tone of preaching denigrates Jesus as much as it does the rest of mankind. It isolates Jesus and discounts the warmth and vigor that characterized his life and words. Now, the second failure of traditional Christianity is to acknowledge as its source moral nature, that law of laws whose revelations introduce greatness, yea, God himself into the open soul. Consequently, men think that revelation happened long ago, once and for all, as if God were dead, instead of being always possible for every individual. This belief makes it difficult for the minister to preach with meaning and to offer inspiration, because he's obliged to preach a religion that's been formalized and codified. He cannot preach the primacy of the soul, because the seer is a sayer. The minister's words do not satisfy his own inner, although sometimes unrecognized, need to impart vision of the beauty of the soul to others, nor do they satisfy the innate craving of the members of his congregation to realize their own personal connection to God. So the death of faith and the lifelessness of the church is deplorable. The audience of new preachers embarking upon pastoral careers to restore truth, let me just check this, the soul and the intuitive revelation to the church, the barrenness of inherited religion must be acknowledged. Ministers must accept their true and exalted function. The minister's particular office is to express the applicability of the moral sentiment to the duties of life, to help his parishioners relate the ideal to their own experience. How infrequently the preacher helps man to see that he is an infinite soul, that the earth and heavens are passing into his mind, that he's drinking forever the soul of God, and points out that we ourselves, sitting in church on Sunday, come to a better understanding of God than the preacher himself offers. Religious formalism leaves us empty. The preacher who does not convey his own humanity and the truth he's gleaned from life says nothing that we need to hear.
Yeah.
So people so want to enlarge their sense of moral sentiment that they still go to church. The good hearer takes what he can from bad sermons by finding in them echoes of more inspiring words he's heard and thoughts he's had at other times. People put up with preaching that does not acknowledge the soul because the stale doctrines that were preached were all once intuitively inspired and preserve some of the vigor imparted by their origins. But the minister is on some level aware of the lack of truth and life in what he preaches, and he suspects he falls short of fulfilling his duty. He cannot even invite men to the Lord's Supper in good conscience because he's unable to bring warmth to this rite, the hollow, dry, creaking formality of which is all too plain. But there are ministers who bring life to public worship. These exceptions are found not so much in the examples of a few extraordinary preachers. Oops, hold on a second. As in the rare, sincere moments of all. So every few instances in some sermon, wherever you're at, you'll be reached. But by and large, preaching is hindered by tradition, by lack of sense of the essentials of the true religion, the soul, and the absolutes toward which the soul strives. And by ignoring man's moral nature, historical Christianity destroys the power of preaching, takes the joy out of religion, and invalidates the very reason for the ministry's existence. And of course, the results are devastating. The soul of the community is sick and faithless. Man despises himself and fails to achieve the goodness which he's capable. People are leaving the church in droves. The loss of worship is the worst of all possible calamities. Yeah, let me just pick up on that. With this second awakening, there was another group called the Universalists who believed that all were going to be saved. It was universal salvation for all. And there was a very charismatic individual, Hosea Ballou, who was their spokesperson. And you can find all kinds of things about him on the web. But in particular, in the 1850s, Unitarianism and Universalism probably comprised 20% of the population of the United States. There was just a huge interest in this. People could see there was a need for this, and what are they going to do about it? Then what happened was the Civil War, where all of these people got killed, and things swung very far over to materialism. What can be done to redeem the church? Well, the fledgling ministers in this, remember, Emerson's giving this to the graduating class. They need to recognize and preach the importance of the soul, restoring man to his place of importance, and combating the notion that religion is static and must be accepted as received. Do not fear the presentation of Jesus as a man, and show what God is, not what God was to other men. So true Christianity, a faith like Christ and the boundless capability of man, has been lost through our tendency to trust in established schemes of religion rather than in the power of the individual soul. Only the soul can restore to man a sense of the divine within himself. To go alone, refuse the good models, to dare to love God without mediator or veil, and so doing inspire congregations that break from their conformity. Provided all these things are key with the Sabbath and the institution of preaching, both will become meaningful again if life and conscience are restored to religion. I would argue this never happened. If ministers acquaint men at first hand with deity, then their flocks will respond with love and gratitude, and so forth. Let me just skip here to the end. Do not establish new rites and forms, but rather breathe life back into those already in existence. If we're fully alive with the soul, the forms of worship that we employ will become plastic and new. And so Emerson is looking into the time when the spirit that inspired the prophets of old will move men in the present, and will bring forth the new teacher, the new minister, who can see the universe and its laws in totality. The world is a mirror of the soul, and showing the correspondence of natural laws with spiritual laws in the ultimate oneness of all absolutes.
Did the current churches or the Unitarian
Emerson's
church?
very clear about man's inherent potential for good, and about how the state into which the church has fallen has obscured our perception of human perfectibility. So man learns that his being is without bound, that to the good, to the perfect he is born. Low as he now lies in evil and weakness, that which he venerates is still his own, that he's not realized it yet. So Emerson's responding to what he sees as a widespread crisis of faith caused by man's disconnection from his source of powers. This drive, you're building the United States in this time period. So you have the railroads coming in, and then the telegraph is coming in. People are looking at setting up iron foundries, and there's just a lot of materialism of focusing on getting on with things in life, and the spiritual side of this is simply left out. The thing that again is interesting about this to me is Emerson's view of evil, that God is perfection, and therefore if he is perfect through his connection to God, then man is perfectible. But goodness and the reward of goodness are within man, and does not require external structures to ensure his virtue. But all of the world exudes a kind of sympathetic support of man's goodness, because that's in harmony with the laws of the universe.
So what
Go ahead.
decade is this?
This is all in the 1838 Divinity School Address.
So it's well before the Civil War.
Yeah.
I think that's what really kind of brought what he's saying here to life. Gave it legs, so to speak, was the war.
Right.
And the abolition movement. That's what really
galvanized. The Unitarians were very active in setting up abolition of slavery. A number of these northern states had already outlawed slavery, or would before the Civil War. The thing I wanted to focus on here was that evil does not have an independent existence. It's merely privative and not absolute. It's the absence of goodness.
I never agreed with that.
Marjorie never agreed with that,
Well, certainly not in the last 20 years.
right?
I think that's a voice of privilege. That's a voice of somebody who's never encountered real evil.
Right.
It has its own energy.
Can I ask a question? Is the
Emerson didn't like the deification of Jesus. He felt this was a disservice to man in general and to Jesus in particular. Jesus never had anything about worshiping him or anything, an icon like a cross or a bull or whatever you would think of. It's really this personal religion, man's intuitive grasp of his relationship with God, that is really what's critical in all this. And to experience that, the insight of perfection and the laws of the soul, this constitutes a grasp of universal absolutes that transcend time, space, and temporal circumstance. And intuitive insight into the divine laws is also timeless and independent of any cultural values or conditions.
Bart, did the Unitarian, Bart, can you hear me?
In its institutionalization, the church has developed a fixed body of beliefs, dogmas, scriptures, and rites, which it offers its religion. This petrification made us forget these traditions originated in the distant past through intuition, working on the religious and creative faculties of man. The spirit is eternal, but its revelation to man occurs over and over again in each new generation and within each man. The religious sentiment by which Emerson writes flows continuously into man from God, is fluid and dynamic, and cannot be contained or transmitted in any fixed form more than the goodness of man can be compressed into particular examples of humanity. Emerson is suspicious of external reform.
Can you hear me?
Wait, Patty's saying something?
Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Oh, okay. Because I was,
Are you going to?
I'm
You're
going to turn
not
it back.
muted.
I'm going to turn it back off because I was trying to ask
We
a
can't.
question.
We can't hear.
We can't hear you.
Did you lose our sound? Wait, let's.
I can hear
Oh,
you.
that speaker. Oh.
I can hear you very clearly.
Okay, Bruce, you can hear me.
Yeah.
But Bart and Marjorie can't hear me.
Patty, is your microphone on or your volume?
Tell them that you
Turn
can
up the
hear
volume.
me. Tell them that you can hear me. I think they can hear you, Bruce.
Yeah.
Speaker didn't go.
Yeah, I hear you very clearly.
Or can you turn it on? How many times?
Here it's on.
I just don't want them to think I'm trying to respond or
power's
ask a
on.
question, but they can't hear me. I'm not gonna leave my video on, but because it'll take up all the juice.
Just a sec, we got to screw up here.
He heard me before.
Patty, say something.
Can you hear me now, Bart?
Yes.
Okay. So Mike, sorry about that, because Bruce could hear me, but you couldn't hear me. It's my question is, did the Unitarian Church of that time, they keep talking about the soul. Did they discount the soul? Because it sounds like Emerson is basically saying, the light's within, the soul is important. Did the Unitarian Church say, no, you need ministers to help you communicate with God? Whereas Emerson's like, you don't really need that.
That was more of a Catholic thing, really, that you need an intermediary.
Yeah. But
That's what I had thought. So I was confused when you were saying that Emerson seems to be criticizing the
Well, I think-
Unitarian and Protestant churches for being too controlling and not
Yeah.
acknowledging the power of the person and the soul. Is that what I'm hearing?
Yes, but I
yeah.
think he was reacting mainly against Protestant churches at the time. English and American Protestant.
Yeah, Catholicism was not that widespread in New
Right.
England. It was really all of these different Protestant.
But did the Protestant churches kind of discount the soul?
Well, they don't stress it as much as Emerson wants them to stress it.
Okay,
Or what he's saying is that you should, as Jesus of Nazareth said, you should look within. Everything is within you.
you are
And-
God. You're a piece of God. You are you're God on earth.
Right. And then being able to learn to meditate so that you can achieve this more enlightened state, this loss of self that comes with this union with the oneness of the true reality that's all around you. And so people like Emerson or Thoreau, would get snitches of this. They'd be out in nature and they'd be meditating or praying, and then all of a sudden everything would dissolve around them for a bit. And they would, bask in this, and then they'd go on. Whereas someone like Jesus of Nazareth or the Buddha, just lived this way all the time. They were just enlightened completely.
But particularly in New England at that time, they were reacting against the Puritans who fled England and Northern Europe, and the Calvinists.
Right, most of them believed in predestination, I think, and that there was no individual power and connection.
Right.
Well, the Calvinists talked about the power of work, and good works, but it was very oppressive. It was you had to mind your P's and Q's every day, work hard and not want anything, and God forbid you wanted to dance, let alone make love. That it was all about the sackcloth and hard work would purify your soul, and then maybe you'd have a chance. But they didn't really even talk about the afterlife much at all. So it was, I think the Catholics had more of a sense of a religious life, truly of the symbolism of it.
When did the Unitarian Church step away from having a belief in a higher power or this energy, God, as being part of their belief? Because it seems, as a new person looking at Unitarian, when I look at what Unitarians believe, and I distinctly feel like I most relate to this than almost anything I've studied, but the lack of actually saying we believe in a God, feminine and masculine,
They'll become more and more and more secular humanist over the years.
right? So when did that start? This secular, it's sort of like embracing everything, which saying that, it's like you have to pick up your theology from any of the other religions because you're not getting it. There's no creed and there's no specific teaching in being Unitarian, which obviously in the early days, that was not the case.
No, they were talking about the unity, that was, and that was a felt experience. They came out of the Congregationalists who were less judgmental and more humanistic than any of the other Protestant religions. They were very liberal.
Mm-hmm.
And they really galvanized, as I said, along with the Quakers. They were really active in the abolitionist movement.
Mm-hmm.
And
they
also
were
Native
real-
Americans. They were
Yeah,
they in the late 1820s, Andrew Jackson took the Cherokee in Western North Carolina and marched them out to Oklahoma. It's called the Trail of Tears.
Yeah.
Because
Right.
no one knows, but maybe 90% of them died on that trek. Not all of them left, but there still are Cherokee in Western North Carolina. But the Unitarians were active in objecting to this and trying to get people like Andrew Jackson not to create these reservations. And
He was at least as bad as Hitler, at least, not recognized for that at all. But they really kind of came of age around that, and then they were also very active pacifists in World War I, and even more so in World War II. And they led a huge effort to help rescue Jews out of Europe.
Hmm.
And
Yeah.
brought a lot
Yeah.
to the United States.
yeah, I would say from my experience, it's really after World War II when you know it was just kind of accepted that your family would be involved in some organized religion of some sort. And so Unitarians were in there, but that was the start of where I mean, what happened was the Unitarians had numbers, far greater numbers than the Universalists, but the Universalists had a ton of money. So they merged in 1961 to become the Unitarian Universalists, okay? But that it was kind of from that point on that is what I saw this blurring of, you know, we can't talk about God, we can't say God. We are open to all creeds and faiths. This became
or equally close to the wall.
yeah. Yeah.
And they have this banner on social justice that kind of replaced any kind of religious notion.
Right.
But I think a lot of that, they're really not pursuing justice. It's charity. And charity often perpetuates the injustice that necessitates the charity. And that could be very self-serving. You know, it could be a real, pat yourself on the heels, see it on back for your great generosity, but you're not willing to do anything to undo the policies that make it necessary. So then it's just this kind of self-aggrandizing.
So the Unitarian Universalist, whatever they call themselves, fellowship or congregation or at one point church,
Right.
just kind of morphed into what it is now. It came from Christian roots and a sincere belief in a higher power. And the Transcendentalists, who were the early influencers, were the ones saying, look, the power is within. We believe in an eternal soul. We believe in a loving spiritual force, but we believe we are connected directly to it. You can have revelation individually, and there is a oneness and a connection between all. That's what I'm hearing. And
Right.
are you familiar with, have you studied much Ernest Holmes and what was called religious science, which is now the Centers for Spiritual Living?
No, I've heard of him, but that's about it. You just gave a really good synopsis, I think.
Yeah. Yeah, and then I was just looking here really is what Emerson is talking about. Only the minister who's experienced this intuitive perception of God can preach it. The Spirit only can teach, and therefore the man on whom the soul descends and through whom the soul speaks, that alone is the one who can teach. So this is what Jesus of Nazareth was. He was trying to, teach his apostles, and they in turn were going to go out and teach others.
But I
Yeah, and
that
he
is
said, oh, he
really-
always said, you can do what I do.
Yes.
Right,
We all have, if you just get there, he was just more evolved.
right. And he wanted everyone to do it and to learn to do it, to
Right.
walk on water, whatever it was. Because it's all one, you can transmute your molecules and the water molecules, and you could do whatever it is. You could turn wine into water or water into wine.
But that doesn't really work really well to build big, wealthy churches that are internationally influential
Right.
and gets a lot of money donated and can, it's like the end justifies the means, I think,
Yeah.
in many
and now
people's
the
minds.
Unitarian, whatever you want to call it, faith, it's almost as if God has become a dirty word.
I'm glad to hear you say that because I did wonder.
And I think it's a problem, as we're saying, particularly in the ministry. You can't preach what you've never experienced. And I think being able to pray and meditate should be a prerequisite. And we've had a whole string of them recently, people who admitted they couldn't do either one.
Yeah.
Then I don't know what you think you're teaching us. They should be really good floor samples. And they need to be plugged in to shed the light, for us.
Yeah,
And if they're not, like the last 2 or 3 that we've had, whether it's
yeah.
it all stops right here.
Yeah,
Whereas Frank, the predecessor, who was there for what,
27 years.
27 years, the top of his head was completely wide open. And so he said things that weren't just coming from his personality level. It's not like he was channeling or anything, but he was inspired. It came from another plane. And he could do very well without using traditional God language or heaven language, or, if you asked him about the afterlife, he'd say, I don't know. But when
And Frank used poetry. That's why we've been trying to
Right.
go back to putting poetry in, because the language, the metaphors, the symbolism that arises in poetry, begins to capture some of this mysticism.
it says things that you can't just say with prose, or,
If you're worried about
it's wonderful.
insulting people who are agnostic or atheist, then you can't have that language as part of your theology, because there is no theo in theology.
Right.
Okay.
Now, for example, my parents were married in the Unitarian Church, but they really identified as atheists. And I would say that was very much a reaction against World War II. They both grew up in the Depression and during the war, and my father was in Pacific.
You can see how people would feel that way, because like, how, if there is a God, how could all of this horrible evil be allowed on this earth? I get.
So much of it happens in the name of God.
Yeah.
Right.
These people were all killing each other over their
But
definition.
we have
God.
an example of this in our own.
In Gaza and
Well, when the music minister first came, there was a debate about getting an organ. And
I heard about that.
this is in like 1980, okay? And so here he was, an accomplished organist, And he did his doctorate on the organ, okay, on the mechanics of an organ and so forth. Very, I'll just say Catholic, and just leave it there. And so this,
But he really is kind of like our Bach,
yeah,
he
he's,
composes a lot.
Yeah.
He's
yeah, but
he's
he
wonderful arranger.
the vote came down to like just one or two votes swung it, so that there was not a willingness to get an organ that would block a lot of the views. So they ended up getting, they had the money to get an electronic organ, but he ended up getting some off-brand electronic organ. And after a while, you couldn't, when the circuit boards failed in it, you couldn't get them repaired. And so we had to throw the organ out. So that then.
But half the congregation walked out as a result of that vote.
Yeah. And so
Because
so
they walked out because they wanted the organ?
they wanted it, and then they
But
lost.
it was 3 votes that separated it. And one of them was a guy who had hearing aids out to hear. And I just want to say, Jim, do you think maybe you should have abstained?
Yeah.
But I couldn't bring myself to say.
Yeah.
He was
So-
a nice guy, but just a total
So then-
engineering type.
I don't know if you were
And
there,
hearing
Patty,
aids.
but like 2 years ago,
No, I just started investigating or coming last February. It's not even been a
yeah,
year.
no. So I'm saying like 2
But we
years
just had a
ago,
repeat of this.
we had a complete repeat. Nothing was learned. So the minister of music, saw all this construction going on to rehab the sanctuary. And he said, wow, if there's ever a time to get an organ in, it's when we're moving walls around. We got the chance, to go ahead and take advantage of this and move an organ in. And so he went out and solicited from somebody, and he was going to get a pipe organ that was going to be probably 8, 9, 10 feet tall, and take out the entire view at the front of the sanctuary, looking up at the hill there, which is where all these urns of ashes are for past congregants. And so he blithely went off and did this, and all of a sudden, when he's announcing this as a fait accompli, and we just have to go approve this as a congregation.
He was basically trying to bypass the vote,
Yeah,
which again enraged half of the
yeah.
congregation.
There were all these people that had come there bringing their kids because they had all had absolutely terrible experiences with Catholicism, and those nuns with those rulers whapping you on your knuckles when you weren't paying attention.
And those priests doing other things.
Yeah, and the priests are the priests.
And to them, the organ was the sound of the Catholic Church.
You got it. And so they
Yeah, I
just
get it.
dropped out. They said, we came here to get away from this, and now you're trying to get this,
And so they're like
pipe
this,
organ, and so they disappeared.
and they're just
Okay.
so vitriolic, just
Oh.
so,
Oh, it was like
angry
throwing a switch. It was like it was like throwing a lighted match on a gasoline fire.
and
okay,
all these fights
just-
on Facebook, and people would just not show
Yeah.
up, and
Oh gosh.
it was horrible. And I finally said, you know what, there's something behind this, there must be pain behind this.
Obviously.
So I asked a friend of mine who does a lot of counseling with people who survived abuse by clergy, not only priests. And I said, do people associate the sound of a pipe organ with, like official religion and their abuse? And she said, oh, absolutely, definitely, absolutely.
Sure,
And
I
she
mean,
said that comes up a lot.
Mendelssohn and the Wedding March. Where do you hear that? You hear it in church.
And funerals.
Yeah.
And so, I just wish we could, but we can't even talk about it because it's so painful for some people. And then the other people, I just love it. Because for me, it was just something like my father built hi-fis.
So it's a genre of music.
It's just
And there's
beautiful
a
music, and
a
I-
whole canon
I
of
just
work
always
there.
loved it. And to me, that's Christmas Eve for us was about the tree and Bach,
Yeah.
on the hi-fi. And we didn't, sometimes we went out to a candlelight service, but it's so sad. It's just so sad that, so then this friend who does this counseling and she runs groups and advocacy for people as well. You know, their rights are just trampled by the system. And she was a big advocate for me in my drama. She became like the big sister that I never had. She will not come to our church when we're having a labyrinth walk there because she doesn't want to have anything approaching a spiritual experience in anything approaching a church. She said, I get that in nature. You know,
Right.
I go hiking, I go, you know, walking or out in a boat.
Who's this?
Yeah,
Oh,
maybe we shouldn't say, but it just breaks my heart that she can't even have a spiritual experience in a sanctuary.
Well, if you're looking at it as a psychological thing, it's like a trigger,
Right,
as they would say.
exactly. That's what I finally realized this time witnessing the vitriol around the thing. It was also during COVID, and there were hard feelings about several things, including changing the name of the church and taking out the word church. That was triggering a lot of people, but both for and against. And you know, and COVID had been going on. So this feeling of they were trying to kind of sneak this vote in, which they were. And it just brought up this incredible
yeah,
enmity and
yeah, Patty, I was head of the music committee. And then I stepped down after a couple of years and someone else was in there. And so,
did tons of fundraising, by the
yeah,
way.
and so the minister for music decided to call the music committee together to do a dry run before he went before the congregation about getting this pipe organ, okay? So I was invited,
By the
okay?
current chair of the committee
Yeah, by the current chair,
said, well, it's a courtesy to invite the former chair of the committee.
yeah. And
And he's a
so,
lovely guy, by the way.
yeah, and so I get this phone call right before the meeting's going to take place from the music minister saying, don't come. Well, guess why? I would start to ask questions.
Oh, not you, Bart. Questions?
Not me, no. And
But he sang in like 5 choirs and played in the bell choir and was the chair, did tons of fundraising. And he knows about electronics and music. And so
now I did my master's thesis in Amar Bose's group at MIT. So
there's a
this isn't
speaker.
what they want to hear.
But so he was research. I think of myself as someone who loves a pipe organ, but our sanctuary is quite small and it's all glass.
Yeah,
So I think it would just reverberate.
it's yeah.
Really.
Well, you need a pipe organ when you've got something like you know, a nave that's
Right.
a quarter of a mile long, and you know, and you know, 50 feet tall, and you're trying to get all those stones to start vibrating.
Right.
You know, so you get this humongous pipe organ, and that does the job. Okay.
We when I was growing up in Brooklyn Heights, there was a Presbyterian church across the street, which of course my parents would never step foot in. But they had a pipe organ. I loved it on Sundays because we lived on the ground floor. Yeah, and everything would be bouncing, you know, from the vibrations, and I just loved it.
Yeah, well, there's something, it kind of touches you, it gets into your,
Right.
right down to your soul.
Right, where the
Yeah.
spirit meets the bone.
And a soul is energy, and so you're vibrating too. Anyway,
But Bart was testifying.
I have diverted you, but it does
That's
seem
okay.
to make, it all kind of comes together in this concept
Right.
that, you know, that this light, this love, this light of the world is inside you. And you are part of it, and there is a oneness, and we are all connected. And that is what it sounds like Emerson was just trying to shake him up a bit and say, come on, get back to the basics.
And that's what we've been trying to share.
Yeah.
But
This is the
example-
universal, all of these religions are viewed as having a common lake, and they're each little streams off those lakes, off this common
Right.
lake. This is what it's all about.
But just for example, but a friend gave me these external speakers that we're using right now. Bart started going to all these websites because we were stuck at home, with COVID, and researching them. And even just with our external speakers, I could hear these wonderful, some of them are called hybrid organs that they're coming out with now. Or some of them have amazing recordings of live organ music that are computerized.
But the same, technology that they're using for artificial intelligence with these processors, they're optimized to go to. They can be used for playing games. Well, in games, you generate sound. They can generate any sound you could think of. You name it. What do you want to hear?
They've sampled
So,
them.
and I'm listening to these people saying to me, well, really, you can only get a bass out of a pipe organ. I said, really?
And
It'd be interesting to hear what an AI
Well,
program would, if it's been fed the religious literature from all these different religions, and then you ask it to interpret and ask it some basic questions, like come up with a religion that has the basics of everything in it. What would the creed be? I never thought to ask that question, but it would be interesting.
you have Bing and on Microsoft, you can go, plug it in. Bing is powered by this chat GPT. So,
well, we would say all the mystics are basically saying the same thing.
I would totally agree.
and these are
they're
just,
having very similar experiences through different routes.
yeah.
But
Yeah.
they're very much about unity. They're very, but
And
they have different flavors, and I think the flavors are significant. I wouldn't dismiss them. But and the slightly different mechanisms, but they're saying the same thing.
Yeah.
But
and-
there's a lot of hope that the Sufis might be able to turn around the violent, the fundamentalist,
the Hamas,
yeah,
the jihadists,
right.
yeah.
But
I mean, that's why I put up this thing about Emerson and Nietzsche, that most people don't realize, there's a whole bunch of YouTube videos about Nietzsche and Emerson, and that Nietzsche discovered Emerson, these books that we're talking about here, and he read them and he reread them again and again. And he could see Nietzsche was probably slightly mentally unstable, but Emerson was bridging between all of this art and philosophy and spirituality, which stabilized Nietzsche. This is what he wanted. So Nietzsche looked at him as his long lost brother, and he also liked this idea of self-reliance, of figuring it out for himself internally. And so it goes.
How else could you ever really do it? I mean, it's just absurd. It's something that has to be a felt experience. There really is no other way. But so in that sense, it's kind of tragic that the Protestants were reacting against all the dogma and structure and the way heresy of the Catholic Church, but they created something so sterile and dry as a result. And in a lot of ways, I think the Catholics kept the aliveness, the viriditas that Hildegard would call it. There's an aliveness there because they keep the symbols fresh, and they're talking about symbols, but they really live with the symbols. They have a relationship with the symbols, And the Protestants, I've heard them have the sermons that are like, legal arguments. And like, well, it really happened because they do contradict each other. So that's how they're really telling the truth. But does that mean that Jesus rose from the grave? I don't know. Not to my mind. I mean, it might mean something happened, but how can we say what?
Well, there's something
but
beautiful about, there's something,
like Lord,
the music, the tradition, the grandeur, the stained glass, there's something, it's art, and it touches people on a certain level. And then you swing the pendulum all the way over to the other side. You've got the shining city on the hill where you're not allowed to dance.
right,
It's
Yeah.
right,
And that's what
that's why you have the Episcopal Church. It's sort of in the middle.
exactly.
Catholic light.
yeah.
And they have women priests, and they have, they seemed at this point to be quite open and hospitable toward gay people, and I think a little more intellectual. But people just deify science, and it's just another dogma.
Yeah, Napoleon approached Laplace, and Laplace was a great astronomer. He would be viewed as, equal to Newton in that sense. And so he's describing about how he can plot all of these trajectories of all these planets and stars and everything. And Napoleon said, where is God in all this? And Laplace said, who has any need for God? which just shows you, another failure of French education. So anyway, here's a different example. We've harped on Emerson, who was very articulate. Walt Whitman was also of this.
And he was a trained theologian.
Yeah, yeah, he was. But the thing about Whitman was he tried to handle bridging the gap between the transcendentalism and the realism. So he himself was a working man. He lived in Brooklyn, and
which was very rural at that time.
Yeah, it's a very different time. You see, he left school at age 11, and he was a printer, a teacher, a newspaper writer, an editor, a stationer. He speculated in real estate. So it doesn't sound like this is the sort of person that is going to do things. So what happened was, in 1855, when he was 36, he published a collection of poems called Leaves of Grass. And this particular first edition, as we'll see here, he actually set the type for it, okay? He was a printer. He set the type for this, and there was no one listed as the publisher because it was him, and there was no one listed as the author because it was him. Okay, it was just a 95-page book with 14 poems in it. Okay, and he continually iterated on this. The phrase "leaves of grass" comes about because the grass comes about because the printing houses are seeing, this manuscript and that manuscript. Would you please publish this as a book? And they just viewed them all as garbage or grass. Okay, and the leaves, okay, are in fact the poems that are in the grass. Okay, this is Whitman as a play on these words. Okay, just trying to explain what in the world is he talking about here. Most of these things, it would have been impossible probably for him to get a quote unquote reputable publishing house to publish this thing. So that's why he simply went ahead and did it. And he did it as a common man. Okay. And he's doing this. This sounds so much like Emerson to me. He's trying to express the inexpressible. I celebrate myself. He has a poem called Song of Myself. but the self he's celebrating is not ordinary self, it's far more expanded, you know, and so it goes. And you
The divine self.
yes, yes.
Hmm.
And here's some YouTube videos you can go look at to go pick up on that.
He was really using his self as a case in point.
Yeah. Yeah, he's
It wasn't
a working man. During the Civil War, he was a nurse. He was a conscientious objector. So he took care of wounded soldiers. But here's what he's saying.
That started because his brother was wounded on the
Yeah.
field,
Right,
and he went to tend to him, which is often what a lot of people did.
right.
And
Yeah,
then he
because
started,
they wouldn't get any nursing help otherwise.
right.
They just have all these wounded soldiers. There's so many of them. You forget how small the country was then, and the number of people it was.
And they didn't have soap. And
Well-
that was a huge thing. No,
Well-
infection was,
Well, they would pour alcohol
right,
on these things.
Sure.
They thought that helped, or you could drink the alcohol to numb the pain. Whatever you want.
right. Or both.
Yeah,
But
So-
most people died of gangrene and infection. from
right.
the
There was
wounds.
more died of that than in battle wounds.
Right,
Okay.
because there was no soap.
Yeah. So here's what he's saying. In the sanest of hours, there's a consciousness, a thought that rises, independent, lifted out from all else, calm, like the stars, shining eternal. This is the thought of identity, yours for you, whoever you are, as mine for me, and a miracle of miracles, beyond statement, most spiritual and vaguest of earth's dreams, yet hardest basic fact, and the only entrance to all facts. So in such devout hours, in the midst of the significant wonders of heaven and earth, significant only because of me being in the middle of it, there's creeds, conventions, all of these things fall away and they don't matter before this simple idea. And under the luminousness of real vision, it alone takes possession and takes value, like the shadowy dwarf in the fable, once liberated and looked upon, it expands over the whole earth and spreads to the roof of heaven. So you can see he, in his own way, is describing what Emerson was trying to describe, I think.
Where do you have the quote about the line of every atom that belongs to me as good belongs to you?
No, I
That-
don't think that's in here.
Oh, well, we've got to work that in.
Yeah,
To me, that's just such a beautiful statement.
yeah. And that
That's a mystic talk.
yeah, the central inner reality of life is the pure consciousness, the divine or the self. And this is what he's trying to convey precisely, how to attain this. And he eulogizes this in this poem here. O thou transcendent, nameless, the fiber and the breath, the light of light, shedding forth universes, thou center of them, thou mightier center of the true, the good, the loving, thou moral, spiritual fountain, affection's source, thou reservoir. O pensive soul of me, O thirst unsatisfied, waitest not there, waitest not happily for us somewhere there, the comrade perfect, thou pulse, thou motive of the stars, sun systems that circling move in order to safe, harmonious athwart the shapeless vastness of space.
Very interesting typesetting there.
Yeah, I know. So,
Well, okay, we've got to find that.
yeah, we've got to find it. I'm just going to skip through. This
that
is the rest of Whitman. He kept, I'm going to get out of this and go back to sec.
He and Emily Dickinson were my mother's favorites. And they're so different, but they're both mystics and in their
Yeah.
each in their own way. And Emerson embraced them both.
Yeah.
And I think Whitman knew something of her work and was interested, but she was kind of horrified by him
Yeah.
because he was just so free willing. And the interesting thing is, apparently they were both gay.
So here you see Whitman,
He wouldn't leave it alone.
he started off with 12 poems in 1855, 95 pages, and he kept adding to it and adding to it. So there's 6, 7, 8, 9 editions, depending upon how you count. The 9th one was the final one, which was published just before his death in 1892, and that had 400 poems in it. Okay, and just to show you, it's the celebration of his philosophy of life and humanity, and praising nature and the individual's human role in it. So it focuses primarily on the body and the material world. The poems do not rhyme. They do not follow standard rules for meter and line length. So many scholars view it as a do-it-yourself project that he just worked and developed this over a 6 or 7 year period as a so-called proletarian bard, and then spent the rest of his life working on it. He also has a lot of discussions in here of sensual pleasures, which of course in the middle 1800s does not work too well. So the book was banned in various places and various times, and
We think that's right.
you know,
Emily disapproved.
yeah, and that was also probably what what to me made it. That's the way to go. And he has some of these things are very well known. I Sing the Body Electric is in part about slavery. He's looking at an auction of slaves, and looking at the different bodies that are there that are for sale. And one of his most famous ones was about Lincoln and the assassination of Lincoln, when lilacs last and the dooryard bloomed. This is people included in this. It's not clear that it was meant to be included, but just to show you here.
It was only published posthumously. So.
Right. So the publisher's name was omitted, and the author's name was omitted because it was both Whitman. He literally published it. He set the type for it, and he has a picture of him, but the picture is he's in work clothes, and he has this jaunty hat, which I can go back to the start here. You can see. There he is here. That's Whitman. So this is not your conventional book, and it's a devil-may-care American working man of the time. He's kind of rakish, and so forth. No table of contents. No titles for any of the poems. Okay, that was it. What you get when you get to the final thing. There's 14 sections. Here they all are, and you can see he's got them categorized in all kinds of different ways. And the thing is just in his own way amplifying through his poetry what Emerson was saying, and celebrating the spirit, the soul, and the recognition of the true reality around you, trying to link up to that. The other thing about it, let me just look here and see. He has this poem, Song of Myself. So he has an all-powerful I who serves as the narrator and attempts to relieve social and private problems using powerful affirmative cultural images. And this helped him to have a distinctly American epic poem, as opposed to, for example, the works of Homer, which was very Greek. They were each meant for a different time and place. The thing about his legacy is that this book has Leaves of Grass has been revived again and again and again, throughout the first half of the 20th century. Here we are after World War II, 1970. But Whitman is really a person who will mix indiscriminately with the people. And this is meant to represent what the United States perceived itself to be in 1970. It was a place where people from all other places came, and they mixed together, and you were who you were, and so it goes.
It's
So
interesting how they distributed his poetry to soldiers during World War II to
Yeah.
inspire people. That's interesting.
yeah, no, you don't, a lot of people.
It was a uniquely American voice. He was introducing an American
Yeah,
form.
yeah.
He really was.
Yeah,
Well, I guess that concept of a light within, even if it is oneness, even if it is connected to all others, there's still very much that sense of independent action and thought and relationship, which is very American.
right. Right. So
Well,
we have more to cover, but we'll do it next time.
Same bat channel, same bat
Yeah.
time. But I just love that he was from Brooklyn. To me, that it just is really special.
Well, the other one that I liked was Thomas Wolfe,
Yeah,
because when he Look Homeward, Angel, and these other books, he wrote it walking the streets of New York. He was trying to capture what it was like being in New York, the city that never sleeps. At 2 a.m, walking all over the place. You get people like that are they're they're achieving this unity with the world around them, but everyone does it in their own way.
well, Whitman did amazing things with time, and he would write directly to his reader. And there were things that would be intended to be like a boon to a reader 50, 100 years forward. And he would say, that's right, I just touched you. I touched you from whatever it was,
1860,
1860, I was gonna say 59. From 1860, I just reached out and touched you.
In 1960,
You know,
yeah.
and that if that isn't mysticism, because he figured out a way to have a kind of eternal individuality. And again, I think he was humble. I don't think it was arrogance. I don't think it was an inflated ego. I think he just was the floor sample that he was familiar with. He was his instrument, and so he was just playing that instrument, was his self and its individual quirks, were what he had to work with. And he was like, well, it's okay, so that, tell me about yourself now, but he played with time and space and multiplicity. He did these inventories of objects that just went on and on and on. And I said, what are you doing? And then I realized he's talking about the multiplicity, of the teacups and the, and the books and the oranges, and it's all there, it's all real, and it all isn't, because yes, we have everything, there's, atoms and molecules and cells, but it's also teacups and oranges and, his books are still speaking to us 100 years later. We get his brain cells, are still connecting with our brain cells through that magical medium of literature. that is a bridge, it's like a synapse between these separate entities of cells.
Interesting way to think of it as it's like time traveling.
I mean, I remember, after the President Kennedy being assassinated, that people dug out Whitman's elegy to Lincoln
Right.
when lilacs bloomed. Okay, because you had this Lincoln, had gotten this whole nation through the Civil War. Kennedy was re-energizing the United States and seemed to articulate a different set of values. And right at his peak, it was all taken from him. Just as with Lincoln, who knows what Lincoln would have done in his second term? So.
And you can't help but think of the parallel, I think, to Jesus. We just and that's why after Martin Luther King, the blacks said no more martyrs. We're not going to put one person up anymore. It's going to have to be all of us.
Right.
Which is a very Aquarian idea.
Right.
But why do we tear down our best? It just seems
Bruce,
to
you
be
want to say something? It looks like.
human nature.
Well, I was just going to say, well, what do you think is going to happen if Trump gets into power again?
God.
Well, I'm honestly
God help.
surprised that no one's tried to assassinate him.
Yeah,
I'll be honest with you.
but they take that's only for the best, that's not for the.
Yeah, they don't
Right.
waste the bullets on, things that aren't worth wasting bullets.
Here's my prediction. Trump's going to end up picking Nikki Haley as his vice presidential running mate.
Yeah, we'll see. He
Who's-
could.
Who is that? I'm not familiar with them.
Nikki Haley, she was the representative to the
Trump,
UN.
yeah, Trump picked her but she was governor of South Carolina.
She's from the South. She's in trouble this week, the most recent news cycle, because somebody asked her what was the Civil War all about, and she just didn't happen to mention slavery. It was about how she said something about how government was going to work. I mean, she's come back and said, well, of course, slavery. I mean, that's the easy thing to say. But it's, but anyway, that's Nikki Haley is sort of, she and DeSantis are the top rivals to Trump.
And Nikki Haley is Indian, as in Indian.
Yeah, she does. I mean,
Not
I don't know
American Indian. Right.
Right. I think she's probably a combination of things, right? Or she's not 100% Indian, is she?
No, but I looked at her parents, and they to me both look to be Indian. So
Okay.
her name, they played games with her name. It's not a standard Indian. The original name, it wasn't Haley. Okay.
Like with all of our names.
Yeah. Right. So anyway.
Well,
Look,
thank you. That was interesting.
we will reconvene a week from today. Have a happy new year.
You too.
These holidays, I've never understood how you could have a holiday in the middle of the night, but that's what we do.
You kind of go into this holiday coma. I had so much work to do today. It was like when I looked at the clock, it was 7:15. I'm like
Wow.
just trying to get back into it. So
Wow.
I apologize again for being late.
No, we'll send you the recording. You can.
And thank you
Yeah,
for your questions.
Yeah.
They always open up
Yeah.
new things, so.
Thank you.
you might not want to post this one. Or you might reignite all the arguments from the congregation.
No, if we do, we do.
Well, I think we should celebrate the fact that we are a congregation that could even have these kinds of conflicts. Because I think a lot of them just sweep them all under the rug, or half the people walk out. But we go at it.
Yeah.
All right, guys. Thank you.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Good night. Bye, Bruce.
Good.
Bye.
Happy New Year. Okay.
Yeah.
Bye-bye.
Later.